It takes just a minute for everyone to get connected to the meeting. But thank you all for joining. All right, it looks like we have pretty much everyone connected. Thank you and welcome to the Don Ryan Center for Innovation presentation. And this subject is managing your newly remote workers. Thanks for joining the presentation. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, just to let you know that this is in fact being recorded, and it will be posted on the Don Ryan Center website for viewing later, just to give you that notification. Also, as we go through the presentation, you may have some questions that arise. Right front and center in front of me, I have the group chat open. And so if you have a question, please throw it into that chat. You should be able to find the chat in the window at the bottom toolbar. If you just hover your mouse over the Zoom window, you'll see the chat option and throw it out there as soon as it comes to your mind. One of the things I will do is I will either answer the question as we go through the presentation, or I will take up that question at the end of the presentation. So again, welcome. Thank you all for joining. Managing your newly remote workers. For some of you, maybe it's not so new to have remote workers, but for the most part, we know that this situation with the coronavirus was very disruptive in terms of choice that team members have on where they work. There was choice taken away. Our choice is now to work from home or defy the orders. So we work from home or remotely, as it might be said. So my name is Dan Behringer. I am the president of Projects by Design. We are a Bluffton located, Bluffton, South Carolina, for those of you that may not be in South Carolina. Bluffton, South Carolina located project management consulting and training firm. When I say project management, we focus all on projects, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. A little bit of background of myself. I retired Army, Special Forces, retired many years ago actually, and have been doing project management delivery in several Fortune 500 companies for the past 20 plus years. The last 3 years, I've started to shift to about half and half between managing projects themselves and then also training project managers in certification. That is the alphabet soup that you see after my name. What those certifications mean is I am able to pass exams showing that I understand how to use a number of different project delivery methodologies. We specialize in small and mid-market companies that are needing consulting and training services on how to deliver their projects. So about Projects by Design, as I mentioned, full service project management training, consulting, as well as delivery company. We have 4 employees geographically dispersed. We're very partial to South Carolina, even though we're geographically dispersed. All 4 are actually South Carolina residents. Headquartered in Bluffton since February 2019. We moved from York County, or the outskirts of Charlotte, if you will. I joined the Don Ryan Center in April of 2019, and I found that relationship to be extremely beneficial to help our growth. When I say 4 employees, that's double, if you will, the number of employees that we had when we first moved here. A lot of that has to do with the involvement of the Don Ryan Center and many of you who are members of the Don Ryan Center for mentoring, coaching, networking, and the services that are available there. So I'm a big fan of the Don Ryan Center, and as many of you are, helping out wherever we can. I've trained and managed partially and fully distributed project teams for 15 years. So this is nothing new in terms of having at least a part of the team that's remote, if you will. What we do at Projects by Design is we follow these values. It's that by learning and adapting, we can apply a variety of project management practices and methodologies In other words, there's no such thing as one size fits all in terms of project methodology and delivery. And that will help to transform your project teams into high-performing, powerfully effective, value-focused delivery organizations. You can find out more about us on projectsbydesign.net. I will tell you we're going through a refresh of our website as part of some projects that we have launched earlier, about a month and a half ago. So we are actually in project mode as we refresh our website. Then I want to give you a quick preview, if I could, of the, let me just pull this up real quick. Looks like my window went down, so I'm going to pull this up. Just a quick preview. This is not yet production ready, but we've made a significant investment in a learning management system to deliver our courseware. If you check back at that URL around the 1st of June, you should see a live LMS with a lot of different training components and offerings for that. We are currently in project mode delivering that. All right, so let's get to the subject at hand. Managing your virtual team. So what does that even mean? What is a virtual team? We say remote workers, virtual, what is that? When you hear that term, what comes to mind? What do you think of? Well, is it a team of avatars, right? Do we all just see the little icon of someone's face and as a represented or replication of them? Or is it people who wear VR goggles, right? This new thing with virtual reality, and you see the commercials where they're, punching the air and things like that with big goggles on. Is that what we're thinking of for a virtual team? Okay. Do you feel it's a good thing or a bad thing? Is this a comfortable situation that you found yourself in? Well, let's start with some definition. The definition of a virtual team is that it's a group of individuals who work together from different geographic locations and rely on communication technologies such as email, fax, video voice conferencing services in order to collaborate. I want to ask you to take that term collaborate, if you could just go ahead and put that in your back pocket. Because we're going to talk a lot more about collaboration and what that means in this discussion. That definition was taken from Wikipedia. Many of you probably have your own definition of what a remote or a virtual team is. I don't necessarily care for some of the ways that we talk about virtual teams or remote, because words have meaning. What I like to call teams that are not working in the same geographic location is a distributed team. They're simply distributed geographically. Now, if we think about that, we have geographically distributed teams, whether their current situation with the coronavirus had hit or not. And so a lot of these principles and things that we're talking about here are things that we can actually apply once, presumably, we all get back to work in our normal locations. And when we do so, we'll find that there is still probably some distribution of your team across different offices, different geographic locations, and maybe across different floors within an office. Regardless, they're still distributed. They're not all sitting in the same location. So some of these things, I think, principles and concepts we're going to talk about can apply in those situations as well. So what do we mean by a team? So we talked a little bit about the virtual side of things. What do we mean by a team? Well, with all things at Projects by Design, we start with learning. So we're going to get a little bit geeky here, if you will, get organizational geeky, organizational management, as it were. And I would like to just kind of introduce this concept of how do you actually get high-performing teams out of the people that you're managing. And in doing so, what I'm hope to describe to you is what actually happens to that team when something like the coronavirus does occur. I'm going to introduce you to this concept called Tuckman's ladder. And Tuckman's ladder is something that I use very often, both with managing high-performing teams, but also with consulting and helping people understand what is really going on with their teams. Now, Dave Tuckman developed this concept in the 60s, and later on in the 70s, he adapted it a little bit. And it's really just an observation of how teams become high performing. When I was in the Army, in Special Forces, and that's the Green Berets, the teams had to be high performing. And I learned Tuckman's ladder after leaving the Army, and it really resonated with me because that was how our teams became high performing as well. So the first thing to know about it is an observation. And so as managers, we manage our teams through 5 different stages within Tuckman's ladder. I'm just going to briefly describe this for a few minutes so that we can then, like I mentioned, look at how the coronavirus impact has kind of affected that team fabric as we've been trying to build it. So the first part of Tuckman's ladder is called the forming stage. In the forming stage, that's where everyone is trying to get to know each other. The primary goal of the forming stage is to introduce each other and for people to get familiar with their roles and their skill sets that are intended to support what the team is going to deliver. In other words, the objectives or the deliverables. In this stage, you typically do not get any deliverables actually occurring because people are just beginning to get to know each other. However, once we put them together, we find that you go through a storming stage. What is storming? Storming is when conflict emerges. Now, I want to be careful with this term because conflict can mean a lot of various things or can have a very, I should say, a negative connotation. People say, oh, we don't want conflict. Well, especially in project teams, which are temporary teams put together, conflict is not only something we desire, but it's inevitable. We're going to have to deal with it regardless. Because we don't define conflict as something negative. We define conflict as just simply we have 2 parties who don't share the same values, okay? That's how we define conflict. And so that conflict emerges when you put work in front of people and you find out what their values are. Are they going to contribute according to those skills that you expected? Are they going to fulfill their roles? Do they withdraw? Do they try to drive past their roles? Do they agree on how we're going to do the work? All of those various things are conflict. They're just simply values. And so as a manager, I should say values that are misaligned. And as a manager, what I'm going to do is work to resolve that conflict by aligning values. And the way we align those values is we establish norms. And those norms are ways of working that the team can agree. And so many of you in your teams, you got to this point where you've normed the work. During the norming stage, work is being completed, but it has sometimes some quality issues and it may not be as efficient as you would like. The team, though, once they practice those norms, are going to get to the performing stage. In other words, conflict is very minimal. Everyone's values are aligned. And not only do they agree on the norms, but they're practicing the norms effectively and efficiently. Eventually, though, someone leaves the team, all right? And someone leaves the team or the team disbands, and you go through a journey. Likewise, if you have a new team member, you haven't introduced them, so we need to make sure that occurs. So we go all the way back to forming. So having described those 5 stages of Tuckman's ladder, especially for those of you that certainly have your teams that have achieved the norming stage, what really happened when the coronavirus hit? Especially if you were comfortable in a co-located setting where everybody sits together and shares each other's space, so to speak, what happened was your norms were disrupted. When your norms are disrupted, there's a natural tendency for storming to start occurring again, because there's a new set of norms, or maybe better said, an additional set of norms that need to be established in order for you to get back to that performing stage that you would want your team. Okay? So hopefully this sets the basis and kind of helps you understand why it is that the coronavirus situation, or any situation that disrupts the team's fabric, will require more management. In other words, more attention as a manager as opposed to less, because if we're storming, that's our role as managers, to move that team back into a new set of norms, or an additional set of norms as required, so that then they can practice those to become performing. So, having said all that, there's a couple other considerations of, as far as your distributed team or your virtual team. One of the things that we want to consider is the team equally distributed? When I say equally distributed, you may have one group in one location and another group in a different location, but they're relative equal in terms of power, influence, or size. Okay? What that means is I'm going to have to treat each as kind of a sub-team and make sure that the communication and work is integrated equally across those teams. We may also have unequally distributed. If it's unequally distributed, and this was really the situation I found myself in when I first became a manager of a distributed team, is we had one worker that was not co-located with the rest of the team, and the rest of the team was all working together in the same spot. My focus as a manager is to do what? Well, it's to make sure that unequally distributed team member or members gets fully integrated into the work of the rest of the team. I had one situation where one person was not co-located and the rest of the team was located together. They would meet, and it was a sort of project where we need high degree of collaboration from all skill sets in order to really make sure we had quality worked into the deliverables. And in that, we found that the team members would go in a conference room, they would talk with each other, and we just had a phone in the middle of the table that the other contributor who was offsite was trying to speak up, and what would happen? Well, they were talked over, right? They eventually, I noticed they were not contributing very much at all. Well, the strength of the team is based upon the contribution of the skill sets and people that you have. So I actually took and did a cardboard cutout of a human figure, put their name on the cardboard cutout, and walked into the next working session and put the cardboard cutout in a seat. Okay, it was a sort of team where I could get away with that, but they got the message. It's like, when we are a team, including this person, even though you don't physically see them. You may also have what I call a dispersed team, and that's what's most common, or probably what you're all experiencing right now, where every single person is separate. There is no physical kind of connection in a single place between those people. So each one of these, we're going to then require some different sort of interaction. The management of that, let me just go back real quick. I wanted to mention the management of that dispersed sort of team is going to be much more challenging, because we're going to have to give equal attention to integrating the work across each of these individuals. And we'll talk about some tools and techniques that will help with that. So another type of consideration as far as your team is, do you have a team that really doesn't require a lot of collaboration? In other words, they are individual contributors. They may have simply transactions that have to be managed. Thinking of accounting, for example, accounts receivable or accounts payable. They just have their tasks to do, and it doesn't require a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of individual contribution to make sure that the organizational objectives are being met. Okay? So in that sort of case, we want to make sure, again, that there's clear expectation individually across these organizations to make sure that we have that individual contribution meeting the objectives. We may also, though, have, excuse me just a second, may have a situation where we need everyone to collaborate equally on a deliverable. And if they need to collaborate equally on that deliverable, then that is going to require a different set of technology, a different set of tools, a different set of training and expertise as a manager, as well as a team member in order to accomplish that. This is the situation we find most often in project teams. Project teams need to collaborate together to make sure that the deliverables are being met as far as the scope, cost, schedule, quality objectives. I call this collaborative contributors. So how is your team structured? Is it fully dispersed? Individual contributors, collaborative contributors? These are all things that help to shape the plan that we want to put in place in order to come up with a way to manage our team to be effective and efficient with the work that's expected. Now, in addition to this, what I have now is several slides we're going to go through and just kind of a checklist, if you will, of questions that we would want to ask ourselves in terms of coming up with our strategy or our plan to adopt a good, cohesive working environment in a distributed setting. So in that, I'm going to just use the typical people, process, and tools framework in order to describe that. I may go through these questions fairly quickly. I do want to tell you that the presentation, though, has been saved in PDF format, and it's going to be made available to you, I believe, sent by email immediately following the presentation. Okay, so this is all ready to be distributed. And by the way, also, before I get into this, I don't see any questions yet in chat, but again, just a reminder, feel free to do that. Would love to hear from you as you, maybe share some of your experiences, what works, what doesn't work, any questions that you have. I'd love to be able to share that with the rest of the audience because we all learn best when we learn together. So people, process, and tools. In the people category, I've broken that down into 3 different categories of considerations for coming up with our strategy. The first one is the team composition. That team composition is much like what we just described as far as individual contributors, collaborative contributors, as well as fully dispersed, unequally distributed, or equally distributed. Also the capabilities the team has. Oftentimes as managers, as well we should, we're thinking about the capabilities of the team members to actually perform the functions that are required of them for the job. Well, in this situation, there's several new functions that are required for them to perform the job. And one of those is to be effective even when people aren't around. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to explore the training aspect. It's one of the things we always want to learn and be a learning organization, so that will help to transform what we do into effective delivery-based organization. Process is your collaborative needs versus your individual contribution, which we just referred to. And in the tools category, I would just say what enterprise technology is available for you, but also the individual technology. Maybe some of you have found out the hard way that not all homes have equal access to the internet. Okay? And wow, what a surprise that can be, that we just can't get there from here based upon the tool set. So let's break these down a little bit more. As I mentioned, I'll go through these fairly quickly, but just some questions you want to ask yourself. Do we have the right blend of team members? Are they accustomed to working alone? I want to ask myself that. And do we have a close-knit social fabric? One of the things that I often see with teams is they create a social network. And so teams may, or portions of teams may go to lunch together every day, for example. Is there a way to replicate that in a virtual environment? If that is a norm that has been established that they're comfortable with, maybe that's a norm we can keep even in a distributed workplace, assuming that they can all gather together virtually using the tools available. Capabilities include, is my team technology savvy? Chances are the answer is not as much as we would like them to be, right? There's a time of onboarding that's going to be required to get people to adopt some of these tools in many cases. Likewise, do they have the skills to perform their roles? And do they have good teaming behaviors? One of the things I would like to stress is that when you have a situation where your norms are disrupted, it tends to amplify whatever behaviors people have, because you go back to storming. And what I mean by amplifying is those that are introverted become more introverted. Those that are extroverts become more dominant of people's time. So that's one of the things that we want to continuously manage to make sure that we have a good balance and equilibrium, and that the people that are introverted are being pulled in, and the people that are dominating time, that they don't dominate to the point where it sacrifices other people's contribution. For training needs, is there technology training required? Chances are the answer to that is yes. Do they need training on team behaviors? Do we need communication training? These are all things that we would want to consider. Okay? And as I mentioned, this list will be available for you after the presentation is over today. What about process? We have collaborative needs. What are some of the collaborative needs? Again, this is if the team has a set of deliverables which require a high degree of collaboration. How much of our work requires contribution from multiple team members? You may actually have a mix where some are individual and some are collaborative. And so a good strategy on timing on how that's going to occur is going to be needed. How will we get that contribution? Are we going to do that through working sessions? Are we going to expect collaboration tools where people collaborate in real time, even though they're not necessarily directly face-to-face with each other? How will decisions, reviews, and approvals be reached and done? Okay? Normally, a knock on the door of your office, I need a decision sort of conversation. We need to find out how that's going to occur and establish that in our norms as a distributed team as well. That individual contribution. Do our team members primarily have individual tasks that need to be done? Do they know how to balance their individual contribution with their contribution within the team? Keeping in mind that we may want to be much more direct and involved, I'm looking for the right word, insert ourselves over calendars, okay? And when I don't mean the manager insert themselves, but the team insert themselves over the calendar. If you are working in the same location and you see someone heads down, got the headphones on, and they're going after it, right? They're really working hard on something that they know needs to be delivered, then that is something that we want to make sure that we replicate that sort of situation for people when they're virtual as well. In other words, you may want to block that time on your calendar, which shows or throw out the busy signal on your chat form or whatever tool or whatever the case may be, something that you will establish as norms that everyone can align to on how you're going to manage that time. Because oftentimes we realize the day has slipped by and we didn't get those things done because of all of the various interruptions. That happens in a co-located area, but it also happens maybe, again, thinking of amplified in a virtual setting. And the last one here is, how will we ensure people are working on the right thing at the right time in the right way? And it, really, that's what management is, right? We're making sure people are working at the right thing at the right time in the right way. How are we going to do that? How are we going to ensure that? That's going to take buy-in from everyone on the team. On the tool side, enterprise technology is, do we have a variety of tools available? And we know about Zoom. Many of you may be using Ring Central. My personal preference that we use with Projects by Design is Microsoft Teams. Because I find most of our corporate clients already have Teams as part of the Office 365 suite, okay? Do we have the right variety of tools so that we can communicate and collaborate? What is the appropriate level of information security? How necessary do we need to make sure we keep our transactions private? Oftentimes this may mean a different, I should say, an additional layer of application, including virtual private networks and those sorts of things. Does our organization have a way of flexing IT resources to the demand? In other words, do we have enough resources to be able to distribute everyone and support the plan on integrating everyone together in that distributed environment? I'm sure that I have a friend who works as a project manager at Cisco, and they are extremely busy right now, making sure that everyone has all of the network resources that they need with the switching capabilities and so on. So do team members have the right equipment available? And do they have broadband access? Oh boy. How many of you, go ahead, if you can, just write out in chat, how many of you got the team distributed and then it found someone lives in the country and they have DSL, or maybe not even DSL, or even worse, satellite internet? We lived in a place with satellite internet for a while, and I can tell you that was no fun. I know there's a lot of things they advertise and market, but I don't want to get into that necessarily, but it goes very quickly when you're trying to collaborate by video, and boy, the cost can be exorbitant. So not all areas of this country are created equally as it relates to broadband access. Hopefully we'll fix that. But it's something we're going to have to figure out as managers. How do we make sure that they can still participate? Because at the end of the day, that's where they've chosen to live. And are there any productivity applications that they will need to purchase as well? Okay, so all of this tools area may require some introduction of cost. Okay, so I've just gone through kind of the people, process, and tools standpoint. So now what I want to talk about is, and I have one question out here that will be answered in the next couple of slides, I believe. We'll check that out. What I want to talk about is, what does it mean by communication versus collaboration? This is one of the things that we just put out in the meeting kind of outline. And so what do I get at here with communication and collaboration? Well, I want to ask you two questions to get started with this. The first question is, can you communicate without collaborating? Right? Can you communicate without collaborating? Well, certainly. When we're communicating, right now I'm communicating to you, but we're not collaborating on anything. Hopefully we're collaborating a little bit on learning, as you will, but we're not necessarily collaborating on a particular work item. but this is a communication that is going on. So yes, absolutely, you can communicate without collaborating. But can you collaborate without communicating? Well, I think you would all agree, certainly the answer to that is no. Okay? What does this mean to us? A couple of things that will impact our teams based upon those answers is I often find that we mistake communication for collaboration. Okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Okay. How do I really know that you understood what I said? Well, if we see the product in alignment with what was spoken, okay? And we can, certainly use things like active listening. Active listening is repeating back what you heard in your own words to ensure that you understand each other. That's not just, leaning your ear and making it look like you're understanding a little bit better. It's actually a dialogue with kind of repeating back, kind of not verbatim, but in your own words to make sure everybody walks away with a good understanding, okay? So if we desire collaboration, we're gonna have to know how to communicate. So let's talk about communication methods. And this is one of the things that I think is often misconstrued, in that if I were to tell you that I was able to manage a remote or a project team that was distributed, I should say, on the West Coast. I live in Bluffton, and I managed that project team for over a year and was very much involved in what they did and made sure that they had what they needed. And I often got feedback that, we really like this project because we always know what we're supposed to be working on and what the expectations are. So, how many emails do you think I would have to send every day? The answer is less than 5. I made it a point to send less than 5 emails a day. And that is because, and by the way, I wasn't always like this. I used to take pride in the number of emails that I would send. That I'm really communicating now, but I was misusing a communication method. That is the communication method called push. What a push communication method is, it's sending a communication and the expectation is the receiver reviews and understands the meaning. We know this doesn't happen. Did you see my email? No, I haven't gotten to my inbox lately. Okay, well, if it was that important and required a response, probably that was not the right method to use. But some example of those methods include those emails, notifications, bulletins, presentations, press releases, memos, so on and so forth. Push communication is best used to send out information that people need to consume in order to be able to take action themselves. Okay, because the expectation is they are going to get it and they're going to understand it. One of the neat things about the email strategy that I employed with that team is when an email did come through from me, then they knew that it must be important and that it was hopefully constructed in the messaging in such a way that they could act upon what they saw. A pull communication is expecting a receiver to access some common information that's from a sender to consume what they need. We also made very good use of pull communication, which includes things like document shares, blogs, dashboards, web pages, so on and so forth. So we had a lot of things synchronized with our SharePoint document site. And this is where Microsoft Teams came in very helpfully, in a very helpful way, in making sure that people always knew what the most current version was of the task list and those sorts of things that they were supposed to take action on. They all had those as favorites and would pull their lists to themselves as I would prepare those lists and make sure that they had them available. So that was all part of that strategy. But interactive communication is when now we're sharing back and forth. Sender, receiver, exchange thoughts, ideas, concepts in real time. It's meetings, work groups, one-on-one discussions, information sharing, decisions that need to be made, those sorts of things. Okay. The main thing about interactive communication is that when we talk about collaboration, collaboration is going to be primarily with interactive. The reason for that is face-to-face communication is the most efficient way to make sure understanding has occurred. Okay? You plan out the appropriate use of these three communication methods. So how was it that I got by with less than 5 emails a day? Well, not only the poll communications that they had available to them, favorites in there that they could access, but I used instant message and chat very, very much because it tends to be more interactive. And if we need to have a discussion to really make sure we ensured understanding, we just flip the camera button on. So the question that was proposed is, do you recommend that all virtual meetings be conducted by video? If they're intended to be interactive, absolutely, absolutely video. We need to have those verbal cues that we're seeing to ensure we understand each other. Much of our communication and understanding is nonverbal, and so yes, we should. Now, I'm not going to get into how to do that in the distributed setting through the technology that we have. I believe the last webinar that Don Ryan Center probably addressed that, but I was a Good Morning America. They had a guy, I guess, that hadn't put his pants on or something, but I mean, really, you're going to work, right? We can establish those things as part of our norms in terms of what we expect from each other as if the expectation is we need to turn the camera on to make sure that we have a good, solid understanding of each other, then set that expectation so people know that they would prepare themselves to go to work in their own home in the same way that they would prepare themselves to go to work at their work location. So plan it all out, and planning, I mean, set those norms. The technology needs are more sophisticated. Another comment here is that there's hotspots in some areas on school buses now in order to make sure that kids can have access to the internet as they do the virtual classroom settings. That is something also to consider is for those remote, when I mean remote, those country areas, which we do have in South Carolina, where broadband access is not provided. And make sure that the contributions are integrated. That's our primary focus as a manager or leader. That's really where it resides. So that's a great segue to the last section of the presentation, which is the acrostic that I like to describe called M.E.E.T, M-E-E-T. So manage your team is the M. The management of the team remains your focus. Keep in mind that this is going to be probably more work, and some of you may agree or attest. I'd love to see in your chat how many of you have adapted in the management of your team and how much work you felt like it became to make sure that the work is all integrated together. It's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen by intent and plan and managing the integrations across your team. Focus on resources and training for the team members. To me, that's one of the first things you want to do. Go through that checklist of questions, say, here's what we need, now let's focus on that. Because when we focus on training and the resources, what that's supporting is developing those norms. Because we got into the norming stage or performing, we were disrupted, chances are we fell back to storming, and we've got to move our way back up through there. The amplification will occur. Reserved or shy resources will need more direct interaction. And again, don't let your energetic team members, oh, hey, I just want to chat for a second. Well, we don't necessarily want them to dominate our time. Chances are they're doing that and wanting to vocalize because they're uncertain themselves, right? They have this kind of uncertainty going on, turmoil, if you will, going on within them, and they verbalize that turmoil, as opposed to the more reserved people will become much more withdrawn because of the turmoil. Either way, we need to manage and balance and get back to that equilibrium. People that are naturally distracted, they're going to be more distracted, right? Again, that amplification. Hold on a second, I got to take care of this. There's somebody at the door, right? Or I just saw something out the window, I got to go check it, right? Those sorts of things. That's going to happen until people get settled into the norms. So we want to make sure we're managing that. And most of all, take care of yourself as a manager. Make sure you know how to use everything so that you can then coach and train your team members accordingly. It really starts to make sure you have all the tools and equipment that you need to make sure that you're going to be successful in your role. I like this phrase, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. And so we don't want to be nags or looking over people's shoulders, and we want to show that we trust people. That is a given. That's a core competency within management, is that we trust our team members. But again, this is a disruption. And so during disruption, it's not that we're trying to always look over their shoulder, but we're probably going to have to manage the deliverables a little bit more closely until we know and are comfortable that the norms are fully established. And so E, the next one, E, being establish your norms. We've talked a lot about this already, but essentially it's everything changes in the way people interact. It's a natural effect, if you will. Let the team come up with the norms with your guidance, right? It's always much easier to modify and adapt norms if people had the initial buy-in. Even if the norms you sense are not going to work quite the way you want right out of the gate, you may want to just kind of go with it and adapt as you go, because it will become clear whether or not that's effective. Everyone is in a disrupted state, including ourselves. Set aside time to set, review, and align to the norms. That's our focus until the team can get performing. Think outside the box. Everything we do at Projects by Design is, there's no one size fits all. Everything we do is about making sure we tailor and size our teams, our projects, our situations, to what we have available to the specific circumstance, deliverables, work items that we are trying to deliver. Norms should meet the needs of the team, not necessarily the needs of management. Okay? If the team's needs are being met, chances are management's needs will be met. Talk a lot more on that. It's more of the servant leadership concept we love, Ken Blanchard put out many years ago. Discuss how your norms and behaviors will be enforced, right? That's, at some point, someone is going to not follow the norm. Are you going to be a self-regulated team, self-managed team, or is the expectation the manager is going to step in? We need acceptance of people on how you're going to not only put the guardrails up, but make sure the guardrails are enforced. The next E is enjoy the advantages of a virtual environment. There's no commuting, right? Commuting can add a lot of stress. I can certainly attest to that, having lived in the Charlotte area for many years and trying to commute from York County up into Charlotte. Those of you up in that area can relate to that. So that we can actually create an environment which has less distractions from the workplace. If we're in a cube, or even worse, this open workspace design, don't get me started on that. There's all kinds of different distractions that can occur in work. We have a different set of distractions, but maybe they're a little bit more manageable. Our individual contribution could be more efficient, and there is potential for more work-life balance. When I'm working at my house, I love to take that 1 hour lunch and just sit out on the patio. We've got 2 dachshunds, mini dachshunds, ferocious little beasts they are. And they like to sit with me there and sun themselves a little bit as I kind of sun myself. And that's not something I could do in a workplace. That's not something I can do in an office. It's something I must confess, I might even take a little bit of a nap. Okay? That's not something I could do in an office. And I come back in the afternoon feeling more refreshed and more efficient. Unplug an environment. We don't have to run out the door, because we know if we don't leave now, the commute's going to be an hour and a half instead of 45 minutes, for example. And we could just drop it and walk away, which I certainly recommend that's what you do. And of course, it also provides capabilities for future personal needs that in terms of this distributed or dispersed sort of situation, where now you can use those things for your family, for example. And then tools and methods, test your tools and methods to see what fits. Balance your individual contribution, less technology heavy, collaborative, more technology heavy. Consider video norms. As we mentioned before, if we're ever in a collaborative session where we want to make sure that communication is understood, we want that face-to-face. Turn the cameras on and make sure that everybody's aware that's a norm, so they're prepared for the camera to be on. Use what your enterprise has made available. Oftentimes there's a tendency, you can go out on the internet and find, wow, there's all kinds of different offerings. I'm about to show you a slide with that as well. Use what your enterprise has made available, as opposed to go out and get something one-off that may require additional training needs. Experiment with varying work schedules as well. Some people are early risers, some people are late risers, some people have obligations for homeschooling now in the morning, and those sorts of things. Replicate what you can with the normal work experience. Just briefly, I got to tell you, my dad is a pastor. He's 84 years old, and he is still a pastor. And so, because he's tried to retire 3 times, I think it is now, and he has not been able to do that because someone always needs a pastor in Mesa, Arizona. So he has a church that he's obligated to preach on every other month. And he was on the hook when the coronavirus hit. He's like, how am I going to do this? Well, the board of directors of the church said, we need to try to do everything we can to make sure that the Zoom church meeting is exactly like a regular service. And I was asked to get involved and talk with the people preparing that. I said, let's talk a little bit about expectations here. That's just not going to happen because you don't have the equipment to do that. Yes, the pianist has a piano in the house, but does the pianist have a way of recording that or capturing that sound, with a good microphone and those sorts of things? No, she was just going to, use her iPhone. Okay. So yeah, how are we going to sing along with the hymns and those sorts of things, right? So anyway, it was interesting how they finally landed on things, but replicate what you can, but then substitute for those things that are necessary, but you can't replicate. Think of that from a planning perspective. And give it time for the team to adjust. It takes time for a team to come out of storming into norming and onto performing. Be patient, train, encourage, support, servant leadership. This is what it's all about in terms of how we approach work there at Projects by Design. Most of all, have fun with it. So in this, here's just a reference of some of the offerings that are out there. This is actually a list of the top 10 collaboration tools. I will tell you that when you get the presentation, I was very surprised, and I think you will be as well, that on this list, the sorts of things that are there, many of these I did not know about. And so now I have my work cut out for me to understand them a little bit better. As one of the comments is, be careful of shiny objects, right? I am not allowed unsupervised visits to Best Buy anymore, okay? My granddaughter, in fact, says, Grandpa, you can't turn in there. if she's in the car with me. All right, so use the situation to your advantage, educate yourself on methods and practices, explore your technologies and norms, and test your strategy, adapt and adjust. I made a brash comment on the LinkedIn post I put out for this webinar. Do you believe that it's possible to be more effective as a dispersed team than as a co-located team? I think the answer is yes, but there's also as much probability that you'll become less effective and less efficient. The difference is using the situation to your advantage. Take the strengths of the situation, which is that people are in environments they're comfortable with, that they just need some training and coaching and mentoring to get them to where you have good collaboration and individual contribution distribution, and you will find that people will take to it. All right, very good. So with that, there's some questions. All right, Linda, thank you for just recognizing the Tuckman's Ladder and Ken Blanchard's servant leadership, virtual teaming. I think it actually, just like with the amplification of behaviors, those methods and those models, if you will, are amplified in disruptive times as well. What other questions do you have? Any other questions? We have 2 minutes left, and so I'm happy to. Okay, we've got a person who would like to speak for a minute at the end. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I'll give you 10 seconds to type it out furiously. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and go on mute and turn my camera off, and we're going to turn it over to Dave Nellums.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Nellums with the Don Ryan Center of Innovation. I want to first of all thank Dan for doing this event for us today. As you know, we're all working remotely and having to work with teams remotely or just working on with ourselves remotely, as it can be challenging. So again, Dan, thank you for all of that. I wanted to talk just briefly about the membership program we have at the Don Ryan Center. Something you may not be aware of is that we now offer free memberships to the Don Ryan Center. This is something Bluffton Town Council and the mayor just instituted a few days ago, where in the past you had to pay anywhere from $99 to several $100s for a business membership. Now you have the ability to be a member of the Don Ryan Center at no charge whatsoever. So let me show you real quick what this is. So again, one of the great things about the membership program is you get access to a lot of resources. And you can see it used to be $99 for an individual. Now it's free for the next 10 months. You, of course, get access to all these sessions, events on demand. We are building out a brand new website that's going to have a lot of content, both digital and just items for like cash runway calculators, other documents, white papers, and things like that behind the membership wall. So you can have access to all of that. And consulting help, business consulting help, marketing consulting help. We have a lot of things that are going to offer with the Don Ryan Center membership. And again, it's free for the next 12 months as long as you sign up by the end of the year. So there's no reason not to do it. One of the other things we're really excited about is that we're opening a new building soon. Now, unfortunately, it's ready for us right now, but we can't get into it thanks to COVID. But the hub at Buckwalter is our new home. It's ready now. The problem is that we're not ready for it. We can't go to it yet. But it is a 3,000 square foot facility, basically a world-class facility, a flex space co-working facility. It's got some shared offices. It's got some individual offices. But there are a lot of benefits to using this location. If you want to get away from home, and I tell you what, but when this is all over or settles down, you can go outside. It'll be nice to get away from home and work somewhere else. But a beautiful facility with a lot of resources, gigabit internet, which is much faster than most home internet systems, access to different computers, software, flexible seating, meeting rooms, small and large, color laser printers, 3D printers, all types of things, even a little kitchen area for free coffee and drinks and things like that. So there are a lot of benefits for being a member of the Don Ryan Center. Again, it's free for the next 12 months as long as you sign up by the end of the year. I highly encourage you to do so. We are been tasked by Town Council to help all Bluffton businesses, and we certainly want to help you, whether you're a Bluffton business that's been in business for 10 years or you're just starting your new thing. We've expanded beyond just the innovation and helping the startup incubator space. So that's all I have to say. I hope you join the center. You can go to donryancenter.com and click on the membership button, fill out a few pieces of information, and tag whether you want an individual or a business membership. And we'll keep you in the loop and let you know when things are happening. And thank you again for your time. And thanks to Dan today for his presentation. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.